They thought they could kick me out of the company just days before my $750,000 in stock options vested, but they forgot one thing. I built the system they showcased to investors, and only I knew how it really worked. 10 days after they fired me, their investor dashboard mysteriously froze during a demo with major investment funds. No one understood why, except me. My name is Natalie Greer. I'm 34, and until recently, I was the technical product director at Voltaxis, a fintech startup headquartered in Denver. Now I'm sitting in my new office, running my own company, watching the news about the circuit break during Voltaxis's investor presentation. They thought they could fire me and steal my $750K in equity. They forgot I built that entire dashboard from scratch. I joined Voltaxis when there were only 10 employees, working out of an old warehouse in Colorado. The company had a promising idea, a peer-to-peer lending platform that would democratize access to capital, but they had no way to showcase the performance of their loan portfolio to investors. That's where I came in. I had previously worked at 2 major financial institutions, building data visualization tools. When Voltaxis's CEO, Reed Colburn, reached out after seeing a presentation I gave at a Denver tech conference, I was immediately intrigued. The mission resonated with me. My parents had lost their small business during the 2008 financial crisis because they couldn't secure traditional bank loans. The idea of building something that could help others avoid that fate was compelling. We need someone who can translate complex financial data into something investors can understand at a glance. Reed told me during our first meeting, someone who can build trust through transparency. I took a significant pay cut to join, but the equity package was substantial, 0.75% of the company with a 4-year vesting schedule. At the time, Voltaxis was valued at $10 million in their seed round. If things went well, that stake could be worth something meaningful. For the first 6 months, I worked 16-hour days designing and building what would eventually become Investor Sync, a real-time dashboard that tracked the performance of the P2P loans on our platform. The system incorporated AI to analyze profits in real time, presented the data in an intuitive interface, and most importantly, provided complete transparency to potential investors. "This is revolutionary," said our first major investor, a partner at Sequoia Capital, after seeing my prototype. "I've never seen loan performance data presented this clearly before." That initial dashboard helped us secure $5 million in Series A funding. As the company grew, I expanded the platform's capabilities. I built in predictive analytics that could forecast default rates with remarkable accuracy. I created visualization tools that made complex financial metrics digestible to non-experts. And most critically, I designed the system to be incorruptible. It pulled data directly from our transaction database, with no opportunity for manual manipulation. Over the next 3 years, Voltaxis rode a wave of success. We raised money through 4 funding rounds, pushing the company's valuation to over $2.3 billion. My dashboard became our signature selling point. Every investor who came through our doors was impressed by the transparency and sophistication of the system I had created. As the company expanded, my role evolved. I built and led a team of 15 engineers, but I remained the primary architect of Investor Sync. No one else fully understood how all the components fit together: the data pipeline, the encryption layers, the visualization engine. I documented everything meticulously, of course, but systems this complex always have nuances that live only in their creator's mind. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. About 8 months ago, Reed hired Sasha Brighton, an MBA from Wharton, as our new COO. Her background was in investment banking, not technology or lending. From her first day, she seemed suspicious of our engineering processes. "Why can't we adjust these metrics manually?" she asked in one of our first meetings. "What if we need to correct anomalies in the data?" "The whole point is that the data is pulled directly from the transaction database," I explained. "If there's an anomaly, we fix it at the source, not in the dashboard. That's what gives investors confidence in our numbers." She didn't seem pleased with my answer, but I thought she was just getting up to speed. I was wrong. As my 4-year work anniversary approached the date when my equity would fully vest, I noticed Sasha and Reed having frequent closed-door meetings. New consultants began appearing in the office, reviewing our technical infrastructure. I was excluded from strategic discussions where I had previously been a key participant. Then, exactly 10 days before my vesting date, I was called into an emergency meeting with Reed and Sasha. "Natalie, you've been incredible for Voltaxis," Reed began, not quite meeting my eyes. "The work you've done has been foundational to our success." I felt my stomach tighten. No one starts a conversation this way unless they're about to deliver bad news. "As we prepare for our IPO, we need to restructure certain departments," Sasha continued, her voice clinical and detached. "We've decided to consolidate our engineering leadership under a more traditional CTO role." "I'm being fired?" I asked, cutting through the corporate speak. Reed winced at my directness. "We prefer strategic realignment. But yes, today will be your last day with the company." My mind raced to my equity $750,000 at the current valuation, just 10 days away from being fully mine. "And my vesting?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. Sasha smiled thinly. "We're aware your vesting date is approaching. However, since you won't be an employee as of that date, those unvested shares will be returned to the company pool." The blood in my veins turned to ice. This wasn't a coincidence or a restructuring. This was theft, pure and simple. They offered a severance package, 3 months' salary, about $45,000, a pittance compared to what they were taking from me. When I pointed this out, Reed had the audacity to look offended. "We're being more than generous, Natalie. Many companies wouldn't offer anything." I signed the severance agreement, cleared out my desk, and left without saying goodbye to my team. I was too angry, too shocked to form words. 3.5 years of work, of sacrifice, of building something revolutionary all for nothing. Or so they thought. What Reed and Sasha didn't know was that I had anticipated something like this might happen, not specifically being fired before vesting, but some form of data manipulation. In fintech, the temptation to massage numbers is always present, especially when billions of dollars in IPOs are involved. And I had seen how Sasha looked at our dashboard not as a tool for transparency, but as a potential obstacle to whatever narrative they wanted to craft for investors. So I had built in a safeguard, a shell layer, that verified data integrity within the dashboard system. This layer used private key signatures and biometric verification, requiring authentication by a founding engineer for real-time performance data updates. The system was designed to prevent tampering, not to be a kill switch. I documented its existence in our technical specifications, though I doubt anyone other than my direct reports ever read those documents thoroughly. The key point was that without proper authentication, the dashboard would continue to display, but 1. No new data would update. 2. All values would be frozen at the point of my departure. I never intended to use this feature as leverage. It was meant to be a safeguard against internal fraud, a way to ensure that no one could manipulate our numbers to mislead investors. But as I drove home from Voltaxis for the last time, a different thought formed in my mind. From my home office, I logged into an independent test server I had been personally billing for the past year, a development environment I used for testing dashboard updates before pushing them to production. This server wasn't connected to Voltaxis's main systems, but it did have the ability to modify certain authentication parameters. With a few keystrokes, I activated the authentication check mode. I wasn't deleting any data or inserting false information. I was simply ensuring that the system would work exactly as I had designed it, requiring proper authentication for updates. 3 days after my termination, I received a text from Jordan, one of my former team members. "Something weird is happening with InvestorSync. All the dashboard metrics are showing last week's data." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting a business plan for what would eventually become Greer Metrics. The next day, Jordan texted again. "Sasha is freaking out. We have the Series F presentation tomorrow, and the dashboard won't update. What did you do?" Again, I didn't respond. I wasn't going to admit to anything, especially not in writing. Besides, I hadn't done anything other than implement a security feature that was documented in our technical specifications. 2 days later, the tech news was buzzing with rumors about Voltaxis. Their big Series F presentation had apparently gone disastrously wrong. The dashboard, the crown jewel of their investor presentations, had displayed outdated information. When questioned about the discrepancy, Reed had fumbled, unable to explain why real-time data wasn't updating. One investor had apparently asked the devastating question, "If your dashboard isn't pulling live data as you claim, what else about your numbers isn't accurate?" Voltaxis's stock price in private trading markets dropped 19% in 48 hours as rumors of potential fraud spread through financial circles. I watched it all unfold from a distance, saying nothing publicly, filing for an LLC, and beginning to build my own, improved version of financial analytics software. Then the email started. First from Reed. "We need your technical consultation urgently. $7.5K per day if you can help restore the system." I didn't respond. Then from the board chair. "We were never informed about the 2-layer authentication structure. Is the system dependent on you personally?" Again. I remained silent. Finally, a direct call from Sasha. "Please, Natalie, this isn't just about us anymore. This is about the future of the company, about everyone who works here." That last one almost got to me. I did care about my former team, the engineers who had worked alongside me for years, but they would find other jobs. The tech market in Denver was strong, and they all had impressive skills and experience. "I'm sorry," I finally told Sasha. "I'm focused on my new venture now. Everything about InvestorSync is documented in the technical specifications. If you can't get it working, perhaps you should have kept the person who built it." I hung up before she could respond. Using my savings and the portion of my equity that had vested earlier, which I had wisely sold during a secondary offering the previous year, I founded Greer Metrics. Our platform offered transparent financial analytics without dependence on proprietary code, a direct response to the weaknesses I had seen at Voltaxis. Within 2 months, I had signed contracts with 11 investment funds, including 3 that had previously worked with Voltaxis. My reputation in Denver's fintech community was strong, and word had spread about what had happened at my former company, though no one could prove I had done anything wrong. Voltaxis was forced to postpone their IPO. Reed resigned as CEO, though the official story was that he wanted to pursue other opportunities. The company's valuation plummeted to $800 million, still successful, but a far cry from the $2.3 billion they had claimed before their dashboard issues became public. I was invited to speak at a fintech conference in Zurich, where I delivered a keynote about the importance of truly transparent financial systems. "Don't just write code to raise capital," I told the audience. "Write code to keep the promises you make to those who trust you." I never publicly discussed what had happened with InvestorSync. I never needed to. The truth had spoken for itself. They fired me 10 days before my $750,000 equity vested. So I did one simple thing: I froze their investor dashboard, and I let the truth speak for itself. My new company, Greer Metrics, reached a $50 million valuation in our first funding round. As the sole founder with 85% ownership, my stake was already worth more than the equity I had lost at Voltaxis. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about building something honest, something that lived up to the promises we made to our users. In retrospect, I realized that what happened at Voltaxis was inevitable. When companies grow rapidly, the original mission often gets lost in the pursuit of ever larger funding rounds and exits. The transparency I had built into InvestorSync became an inconvenience for executives who wanted flexibility with their numbers. I could have fought them legally over my equity. I had consulted with an attorney who said I might have a case for wrongful termination, but lawsuits are expensive, emotionally draining, and can drag on for years. Besides, I knew that the best revenge would be success on my own terms. 6 months after leaving Voltaxis, I received an unexpected email from a familiar address, Reed Colburn. He had started a new company and wanted to meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe in downtown Denver. away from the tech hubs where we might be recognized. Reed looked different, humbler, with dark circles under his eyes and a slightly disheveled appearance that contrasted sharply with his former polished CEO persona. "I owe you an apology," he said after we'd exchanged awkward pleasantries. "What we did to you was wrong. It was Sasha's idea initially, but I went along with it. The board was pushing for cost-cutting before the IPO, and your equity was substantial. $750,000, I said flatly. Not even a rounding error for a company valued at $2.3 billion. He winced. "I know. It was short-sighted and, frankly, stupid. We lost a lot more than that when the dashboard issues became public." "Did you ever figure out what happened?" I asked, curious about how much they had pieced together. Reed gave me a long look. "Officially, a complex authentication failure due to inadequate documentation. Unofficially. We all knew it was you, Natalie. We just couldn't prove it, and even if we could, going after you would have only made the company look worse." I sipped my coffee, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. "The irony," Reed continued, "is that the feature that caused us so much trouble was actually brilliant from a security perspective. If we had just honored your equity, that same feature would have protected us from actual fraud attempts." I allowed myself a small smile. Integrity protection works both ways. It keeps outsiders from manipulating your data, but it also prevents insiders from doing the same. We talked for another hour. Reed shared that Voltaxis had eventually recovered somewhat after bringing in a new executive team, though they had abandoned their IPO plans for at least another year. Sasha had been quietly asked to resign. Most of my former engineering team had stayed, though they had struggled for months to fully understand and rebuild parts of my system. As we prepared to leave, Reed asked the question I could tell had been on his mind the whole time. "Would you consider coming back not to Voltaxis? That bridge is probably burned, but my new venture could use someone with your skills. Full founder equity, complete technical control." I was momentarily speechless. The audacity was almost admirable. "No, Reed," I finally said. "I'm building something I believe in now, something that's mine, but I appreciate the offer. It's the most expensive apology I've ever received." He laughed at that, and we parted on surprisingly amicable terms. Walking back to my office, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in 6 months. Being fired had been painful, humiliating, and infuriating, but it had also forced me to take a leap I might otherwise have postponed indefinitely, founding my own company, building my own vision. Greer Metrics was growing faster than I had anticipated. We had recently hired our 10th employee and were preparing to open a second office in Austin. Our platform was being used by investment firms managing over $10 billion in assets, and most importantly, we were delivering on our core promise: complete transparency in financial analytics. When I reached my office, I found my team gathered around a monitor, champagne bottles in hand. "What's going on?" I asked. "We just signed Morgan Stanley," my head of sales announced. "They're moving their entire alternative investments division to our platform." As we celebrated, I couldn't help but think about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If Voltaxis hadn't fired me, I would still be there, a well-paid executive with valuable equity but working on someone else's vision. Their attempt to save $750,000 had not only cost them millions in valuation, but had also created a competitor that was now threatening their market position. Later that evening, alone in my office, I opened my personal dashboard that still tracked Voltaxis's public metrics. Their numbers had stabilized, but they were growing much slower than before. Meanwhile, our growth curve was nearly vertical. Within a year, we would likely surpass them in key markets. I closed my laptop and looked out at the Denver skyline, the lights of the city twinkling in the dusk. I thought about how often in business and in life short-term thinking leads to long-term disaster. Voltaxis had tried to save money by denying me what I had earned. In doing so, they had compromised their integrity and, ultimately, their success. I had learned a valuable lesson from the experience: your worth isn't determined by how others value you, but by what you know you can create, and sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best opportunity of your life. They fired me 10 days before my $750,000 equity vested, thinking they were saving money. Instead, they created their most formidable competitor and lost far more than they had tried to save. All because they forgot a fundamental principle of business integrity in systems and in dealing with people is not just an ethical choice, but a practical one. As for me, I built something better, something truly mine, and that has made all the difference. My name is Natalie Greer, and this is just the beginning of my story. The following year was a whirlwind of growth and challenges for Greer Metrics. We expanded from 10 to 47 employees, secured $15 million in Series A funding at a $120 million valuation, and launched 3 new products. Our core dashboard system, which I had completely rebuilt from scratch, learning from both the strengths and weaknesses of InvestorSync, was now being used by over 70 financial institutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. I now had more equity in my own company than I would have had at Voltaxis, even if all my shares had vested. More importantly, I had complete control over my destiny. No one could take it away from me with a surprise meeting and corporate doublespeak about strategic realignment. Roughly 14 months after my firing, I received a LinkedIn message from Jordan, my former team member at Voltaxis. He wanted to meet for drinks. We met at a rooftop bar in Lodo, Denver's lower downtown district. Jordan looked both excited and nervous as he approached my table. "It's good to see you, Natalie," he said, giving me an awkward half-hug. "You look successful." I laughed. "I'm doing well. How are things at Voltaxis?" He glanced around as if worried about being overheard, despite the fact that we were surrounded by tourists and young professionals who wouldn't have known Voltaxis from a vacuum cleaner brand. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," he said, lowering his voice. "They're cooking the books." My heart sank. Despite everything that had happened, I still cared about the platform I had built and the mission Voltaxis had originally stood for. "What do you mean, exactly?" Jordan explained that after months of struggling with the dashboard, they had finally rebuilt it, but without the integrity verification layers I had implemented. The new system allowed manual adjustments to metrics before they were displayed to investors. "Sasha may be gone, but her influence remains," Jordan said. "The new CFO comes from the same investment banking background, and he's been smoothing out our default rates to make our loan portfolio look less risky than it actually is." "Do you have proof?" I asked. He nodded and slid a thumb drive across the table. "I've been documenting the discrepancies for the past 3 months. The raw database numbers versus what appears on the dashboard. Sometimes the difference is small, but it's consistent and always in the same direction, making the company look better than reality." I stared at the thumb drive but didn't pick it up. "Jordan, why are you bringing this to me? I don't work there anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I remembered from our time working together. "2 reasons. First, I thought you should know that you were right about the need for those integrity checks. And second, I want a job at Greer Metrics." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you blackmailing Voltaxis and trying to get hired in the same conversation? That's ambitious." "No," he protested. "I'm not planning to expose them publicly, but I can't work there anymore knowing what I know. And you've always valued honesty in data and in people. I thought you'd want to know what happened to your system after you left." I considered his words carefully. Jordan had been a talented engineer, and we had worked well together, but hiring someone who was bringing proprietary information from a competitor, even if that competitor had wronged me, felt ethically questionable. "I can't look at whatever is on this drive," I said, pushing it back toward him. "And if you want to work for Greer Metrics, it needs to be based on your skills and cultural fit, not because you have dirt on Voltaxis." He looked disappointed but nodded. "I understand. What should I do about—" He gestured to the thumb drive. "That's your decision," I said. "If you believe investors are being deliberately misled, there are regulatory bodies that handle such things, but I can't be involved, given my history with the company." We finished our drinks, and I took his resume, promising to consider him for a position based solely on his qualifications. As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication that my concerns about data integrity had been justified. Sadness that the company I had helped build had strayed so far from its original mission. 2 weeks later, after a thorough interview process that I deliberately removed myself from, Jordan joined Greer Metrics as a senior engineer. He never mentioned Voltaxis again, and I never asked. Whatever happened to that thumb drive was between Jordan and his conscience. 3 months after that meeting, the financial news reported that Voltaxis was under investigation by the SEC for potential securities fraud related to misrepresentation of loan performance metrics. I watched the company's stock price plummet again, this time by over 40%. Reed had long since left, but several executives were named in the investigation, including the new CFO Jordan had mentioned. I felt no satisfaction in their troubles. What I had done after being fired was a personal response to a personal injustice. This was different systematic deception of investors that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved with the company, including the rank-and-file employees who had done nothing wrong. The investigation dragged on for months. During that time, 3 more Voltaxis employees reached out to me about positions at Greer Metrics. I insisted on the same firewall they would be evaluated on their merits, and I didn't want to hear any internal information about their former employer. We ended up hiring 2 of them. As Voltaxis struggled under regulatory scrutiny, Greer Metrics continued to thrive. Our reputation for absolute data integrity had become our greatest selling point. Financial institutions were increasingly concerned about regulatory compliance, and our platform's inability to be manipulated was exactly what many of them needed. By the end of our second year, we had grown to over 100 employees and were valued at $300 million. I owned 65% of the company after our funding rounds, a stake worth $195 million on paper. The $750,000 in equity I had lost at Voltaxis now seemed like pocket change. Yet I still thought about that day in Reed's office sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange sense of gratitude. If they hadn't fired me, I might never have founded Greer Metrics. I might have remained comfortable but ultimately unfulfilled, building someone else's vision rather than my own. In a strange way, Reed and Sasha had done me a favor, though that certainly hadn't been their intention. They had tried to save the company $750,000 and had instead created a competitor that was now worth hundreds of millions and taking their market share. It was a lesson in karma, or poetic justice, or simply the unintended consequences of short-sighted decisions. Whatever you called it, the outcome was clear. Their attempt to cheat me had cost them far more than they had hoped to save. As for me, I had found something more valuable than equity in someone else's company. I had found my purpose building financial systems that could not be manipulated, that delivered on their promises of transparency and accuracy. In a world of financial smoke and mirrors, Greer Metrics stood for something different, something honest. They fired me 10 days before my $750,000 equity vested, and in doing so, they set me on a path to building something worth so much more, not just in financial terms, but in purpose and impact. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best beginnings. My new beginning was Greer Metrics, and we were just getting started. The story of what happened between Voltaxis and me eventually became something of a legend in startup circles. Not because either of us publicized it, I never spoke publicly about the specifics, and Voltaxis certainly had no incentive to share the tale, but because the truth has a way of spreading through networks of people who know what really happened. The story evolved with each telling. Of course, in some versions, I had deliberately sabotaged the dashboard as an act of revenge. In others, I had warned Reed and Sasha about the authentication system, but they had ignored me. Neither was true, but I never bothered to correct the record. The important thing was the lesson people took from it: treat your employees, especially your founding team, with fairness and respect, or risk consequences far beyond the immediate savings. 3 years after my firing, I was invited to give the commencement address at my alma mater's computer science department. Standing before hundreds of eager young graduates, I decided to share some of my story, though without naming Voltaxis directly. Early in my career, I told them, I helped build a company from 10 people to over 300. I created their core technology, the system that investors trusted and that facilitated millions in funding. And then, days before my equity fully vested, I was let go for strategic reasons. I paused, scanning the attentive faces in the audience. I could have sued. I could have gone public with my story. I could have done many things out of anger or a desire for revenge. Instead, I channeled that energy into building something better, a company founded on the principle that integrity in data is non-negotiable. I shared how Greer Metrics had grown, how we were now changing the financial analytics